Okay, this is a new episode of Quackaholics Anonymous, and this week I've got the webcam hooked up to the desktop, and I've got a microphone that I got through an Amazon gift card that I'm using to try to see if I can improve the sound quality, because the last couple of videos, I don't know what the issue was with the laptop, but every video the sound kind of sounded a bit choppy. Also sounded like I was talking from a real long way away, and so I just thought I'd try this out and see if I could give viewers a better quality. I'm having to lean forward and bump my mouse a little bit because I was recording a prior video before I started doing this one, and the screen went out and the monitor went to sleep, and the whole video was a total fiasco. So here I am starting over again. The topic I was going to touch upon this week has to do with something I've been seeing a lot of comments about, and I've also been noticing a lot of articles in certain online groups where people have posted about dangerous criminals who've committed really heinous crimes, and they're being court ordered and sent to AA. And in fact, the Carla Breda murder case was such a situation. I mean, this guy had been going to AA for years, and he had, he didn't have any what they call sobriety, if you want to use that term, or anything like that. He just had been going to AA, and he knew how to talk the talk. And that's really all that's required to be a successful member of AA, is talk a bunch of good talk. But I've seen some on YouTube. In fact, I even got a comment along that line. And on the surface, it sounds kind of logically plausible. And the argument was, well, if you don't like AA meetings, just don't go to them. Somebody had sent me a message on that one. Not the comment, but I actually got a message from someone about that. In fact, that's been a while ago. They said if you don't like AA, just don't go. Nobody's forcing you to be there. Now, on the surface, that sounds plausible, but they apparently seem to forget about the fact that AA has its mitts in our legal system, and it has our mitts in the courts and the hospitals and many other ways in which it actively pushes people into its membership. Now, AA members and defenders will oftentimes say, well, this is not our fault. It's the courts that are doing this. I've seen some AA members, proactive AA members, that would say, I wish they'd stop sending people here. Well, now I am going to say, like I said in another video, that some of the worst predators and some of the worst people that I've ever seen were actual members of AA and esteemed old-timers and trusted servants. I mean, these were the scum of the earth. They weren't the people that was court ordered in there. But to give you a good example about the AA recruiting, aggressive recruiting power that it has within our legal system, I can tell you a little bit about drug court. At the time I was in drug court, and it was a harrowing experience, to say the least. There was a real crooked halfway house owner in the city, who's, kind of pretty much known to be a slumlord. The guy's a total sleaze. Guy's a total scumbag. He goes around riding motorcycles and fancy sports cars all around town all day long and hanging out in AA meetings because he makes hundreds of thousands off of people that are forced into his halfway houses. And I might add that the rent in those halfway houses varies depending on how much you make. In other words, if you make minimum wage, he'll take about 80% of your check and leave you, so much money, because he says you don't need a lot of money because you just use it to get drunk anyway. If you make, say, $700 or $800 a week, then he takes about 80–90% of that. And of course, if you're in there by order from the courts, you don't have any say-so in anything that he's doing. You can't, say, hey, you're fucking me on my rent. And you can't say, hey, this is bullshit, this is a shakedown, because he could throw you out into the streets at any given time. But if you're there via a court order, you can go to jail. You can't talk back to him. He can cuss you out. He can treat you like dirt. You can run unsafe places. There was one time one of his buildings caught on fire because of faulty electricity, and it looked like he was going to get into some legal trouble. I guess he leaned on the drug court judge for that one. And it's really funny how everybody that judge deems not worthy to live on the streets, but has to live in a halfway house, they all go to his halfway house. Nobody seemed to put two and two together to say there's something really fucking crooked about that. They just, they just accepted it, that it was a common, normal thing. If we don't want you living at home, we'll just put you in this halfway house. It's not a situation where someone's living in a very destructive environment for instance, or living on the streets and they have no place to go, that they get court ordered into those places. I knew one kid that was in the program with me, that he was unemployed and he was looking for work. And at one point, the counselor said, you know, what do you do in your spare time? And he said, I like to watch movies on Netflix. He's like, you know something, I don't like your attitude. You're going to a halfway house. And of course, the guy was thrown in there, and then he's at the whim of the slumlord fucking owners. And of course, he was thrown out into the street one night over some silly bullshit. And of course, you know, he got to sit in jail for about a month or two over that one. AA has, I guess, like one guy on the Orange Papers was saying, it's in the position of a snake, and it's being force-fed mice. Now, the snake's not complaining about all these mice that it's getting to eat because it's getting fed fully. And in this analogy, it's the legal system in AA. AA uses the legal system, the medical industry, and a lot of other organizations for its active recruiting tools. Now, a lot of people, and you know, have said that, you know, it's AA does not want those people there. AA wants to go back to being what Bill W. wanted in the 1930s, when it was just two drunks helping another. Well, there's a couple of little things in Bill W.'s Pass It On, and in the Little Red Book of Hazelton. Yeah, it's the Little Red Book of Hazelton. Just like the Little Red Book of Chairman Mao Zedong, you know, that talks about how you're actively going to work with the clergy, you're actively going to work with the legal system, with cops, with lawyers, with all of that stuff in order to get people recruited. And of course, they didn't call it recruiting, they called it helping another suffering alcoholic, because, you know, after all, that's what they're really all about, is helping other people, even though, what is it, our real purpose is to serve God. You know, I mean, how many people, when they first walk into a meeting and they hear it's about quitting drinking, what would they do if they were told your real purpose is to serve God? And usually that means their version of God. It's always weird how people, like these cult leaders like Bill W., they love to talk about serving God, but it's funny how the God always lines up with exactly what they believe is true, and the rules, of course, don't apply to them. I've actually seen people in court with public intoxication charges and things like that when I was in the drug court program that were court ordered to go to 90 meetings in 90 days or else. And I've seen, like when I was in drug court, you had to go to court every Monday morning, at least on my schedule. You know, different courts had different days when you had to go down there. And you never knew from day to day, week to week, you never knew if you were going to go to jail that morning. Because when I first went into drug court, I had thought to myself, well, look, you know, I'm just not going to drink. I mean, I'm just not going to drink, and I'll pass the fucking drug test and I got nothing to worry about, right? Not exactly true. They have this little thing where they try to, and you know, it's funny, they'll never show you the tests, but they'll measure protein, they claim, in your urine. And if it's not to the acceptable level, they'll throw you in jail for a week or two to think about that. Now, here's the funny thing. There was, at one point, when they were saying my protein was low, and they weren't actually throwing me in jail, what they would do is they would take me down there, and they would put me behind the court box thing, you know, like I was about to be sent to jail, and they would threaten me, and they would harangue me, and they would harass me, and they'd talk about, you know, they just degrade me in front of everybody. And I asked them to see the results of the test, and they never would show it to me. So one time I said, well, look, this is what I'll do. I'll go to a doctor, and I'll take a blood test, and I'll bring this blood test down here, and I'll pay for it out of my own pocket, and it'll prove I haven't done anything. Even better, I will pay a doctor to sample my hair, and we can just settle this whole protein issue right now. Well, of course, they didn't want to hear it. They weren't even interested in hearing it. In fact, they got pissed off at me because I had brought that up. And this is a legitimate arm of the government that's using 12-step programs and AA meetings. In order for you to stay in the program, you actually had to take a big book test at the courthouse. You actually had to talk about your sponsor. You actually had to give a sponsor's phone number out where a sponsor could be reached. You were regularly told, you know, what step are you on, and all this other stuff. Now, of course, it's very easy for these kinds of things to take place within the government system, because after all, who gives a fuck about a few drunks and drug addicts, right? I mean, that's kind of the the accepted consensus of society in general. These people put themselves in this position, so they deserve whatever happens to them, whether it's just or unjust. In fact, you're told a lot of the times, just be glad you're in the deal. Just be glad we haven't thrown you in prison. Just be glad, that you have an opportunity to taste freedom. And I can tell you a little bit more about the corruptions that went on behind it, because at the time I had signed up for it, they had told me, that if I did my year and I didn't get any trouble and I didn't fail any drug tests, that they were going to completely expunge my record, and I was going to be like a free man, brand new, starting off from the beginning. And of course, about 7 months into it, I was told that they were not going to expunge my record, that they were not going to clear my name, and that I was just going to have to deal with that and live with that because I had put myself in that position to begin with. Now, this seems like I've strayed very far off from the topic of AA aggressive recruiting, but I'm going to say that most of the meetings I was going to, even after I was out of drug court, before I ended up in drug court, were all 99% court-ordered people. And let's really think about this for a minute. I mean, what would happen if a judge was ordering people into Scientology every week, or you have to go to so many Scientology gatherings? Would there not be an outcry in this country about religious liberty? Would there not be some kind of an angry response from the world at large? In fact, a lot of people don't know that Scientology actually had kind of a front group, a front organization that was known to supposedly treat people with addiction problems through Scientology. It just never seemed to get, it's still in existence. I've got notes pulled up right here. It was called Narcanon, and it just hasn't gotten its way into the legal system yet. It seems like AA has, the monopoly on that. But you got to consider that first, you often have therapy program counselors that tell the judges and the probation officers that AA has been proven to work, that AA is the only way, or they will say AA is the proven solution for those who want it. And the therapy program is the city or state approved program for treating alcoholics. And therapy programs usually, almost always, exclusively mean AA and NA. Of course, the counselors in all these programs are good cult members of AA and NA as well. And of course, they try to say our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. Well, we kind of know that's not true. Throughout, looking at the way that they advertise on television aggressively, if you or someone you love is addicted to alcohol and they just won't pick themselves up, give us a call. There were insurance companies I know that would not pay for certain types of things unless you agreed to go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, or unless you agreed to go to 12-step rehabs. There have been cases of people that were in the drug court counseling sessions with me that they weren't court-ordered in the drug court, but they were like in situations involving marriage counselors, or involving situations with healthcare providers that said, well, you got to go to some treatment meetings and you got to go to AA, otherwise, your chances of getting a successful divorce are fucked. And even though you weren't necessarily an alcohol abuser, it was just the best thing to tell them at the time. That doesn't really sound like a strong attraction rather than promotion, if you ask me. And then you look at how many medical professionals endorse it. I'm doing two things at once here. I've got two screens open while I'm some of this I'm taking out of the orange paper, some of this I'm just saying as I go. I never rehearse, I never pre-plan. But you look at the early things that was going on in AA, in regards to like Bill W.'s Pass It On, when he talked about educating the clergy, the doctors, the judges, and the educators, the employers. We will never miss an opportunity to pick up strong prospects after a bit with this type of education. That's in Pass It On, the story of Bill Wilson and how the AA meetings reached the world. It's on pages 225 and 228. Thank God for orange papers. I mean, the guy, if I could personally write to the guy, or if I could personally do something to help him out, I would, because he was instrumental in waking me up on this. You also have to think about the fact that in November, now this is a long time ago I'm talking about here. This is all the way back in November 2002, which is not a long time ago to an old guy like me. Like a long time ago, when someone says a long time ago, I'm thinking the 1970s or something. I mean, the 1990s were yesterday when I was a teenager. But November of 2002, the AA Grapevine actually published an interesting tidbit, and I think that anyone listening will find this interesting, that over 61% of the membership of Quackaholics Anonymous was actually not a membership comprised of some drunk that walked in off the street, and said, "Oh, I need help. I can't quit drinking." 61% was actually forced there by an outside entity. Now, to break it all down into numbers, that was 32% treatment facility, 12% by court orders, 8% by counseling agencies, 7% by healthcare providers, 2% by correctional facilities, and the list goes on. These were statistics that AA openly admitted to. We don't really know what the accurate statistics are because AA, as we know, is not a very honest organization. They try to downplay anything that reflects negatively on them, and they refuse to be studied by outside people. Even one of the biggest defenders of AA, George Valiant, set out to prove that AA was more effective than any other organization when it come to quitting drinking. And he had to begrudgingly admit, and very begrudgingly, that the relapse rate in AA was actually much stronger than it was for people who were trying to do it on their own, that people who relapsed were more prone to severe binges, that the suicide rates had actually skyrocketed. Now, the funny thing about that is he still defended Quackaholics Anonymous. He said, well, it still has the ability to help a lot of people. It has the ability to help a lot of people, even though it creates binge drinkers and suicides. Real sound logic you got there. And another thing that AA has today that a lot of people are not aware of, I wasn't aware of it, is that it has front organizations that are pretty much promotions of an AA promoting agencies. You have ASAM, the American Society of Addiction Medicine. You got NCADD, the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, and the NAADAC, the National Association of Alcoholism and Drug Abuse Counselors. In fact, as a matter of fact, right here, let me pull this up right here. The NCADD, whatever, BCDA, the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence. The first thing I did, I put a little Google for them, and I looked at the first thing that popped up is a Twitter feed. In fact, if you go to it right now, you might catch it. It says, it's a proven fact that 12-step organizations are vital and crucial for the recovery of addicted persons. That's the very first thing that I saw when I Googled them. The very first thing that turned up in the screen here is a tweet. And the tweet says that it's vital to have 12 steps in order to recover. Now, this is a group that's pushing itself as one of the leading experts in the nation on recovery and alcohol abuse. And yet their website right here I'm looking at is loaded with recovery talk. As a matter of fact, this particular page right here, which is the ASAM, I try not to run all the letters together this time around. The first thing it has is on their webpage, after you get past all their articles about the opioid epidemic and how people need help, is a thing that says, what is addiction? And of course they say addiction is a brain disease. And right here in the definition, it says that it often has spiritual. How many doctors and leading psychologists and how many medical doctors do you know that refer to some kind of illness as spiritual? I've never had an MD or a medical doctor tell me, hey, you got a spiritual cold. You got the flu, and it's a spiritual flu. That's why I can't give you antibiotics for that, because after all, it's a spiritual flu you're suffering from. We can't even do surgery on you. You just got to pray and turn it over to God. These organizations all bill themselves as the leading voices in the nation for alcohol abuse and drug abuse. And it looks very obvious to me that it's nothing but one big promotion for AA. It's one big AA advertisement. So we're not really in a position these days in the nation where you can actually say, if you don't like AA, don't go to AA. Not as long as it's got these kinds of rackets going on, not as long as it can shake down the legal system for God knows how much money. I mean, does Alcoholics Anonymous actually publish its financial reports? I mean, I know a lot of people think, this is a group of people sitting around in a church basement when someone drops $1 in the basket, it helps pay for some poor poor bastard, to get a cup of coffee or something like that. Have you ever actually Googled the building in New York where they're located? Have you seen their big giant office? There used to be the Penn and Teller's Bullshit television show. I mean, have you ever actually seen what it looks like when you go in there? There's signs with the word God all over them. There's God and money involved in this. It seems that the 12-step God wants AA to prosper. I could do a whole nother episode on Bill W. and the multi-million-dollar and the scheme that he did with the big book. In fact, I probably will do one of those pretty soon. I don't want to get too ahead of myself on this one. And I've noticed, you know, like it or not, Hollywood has some kind of love affair with Quackaholics Anonymous, likely because there's, you know, it has members. I mean, if you were a member of an organization and you were a director or you were a writer or a screenwriter or a scriptwriter or something like that, you would probably figure out ways to slant, you know, fiction in the direction of your agendas. I mean, I don't know, you know, there's a lot of fictional authors I've read over the years that you can't help but see there's an underlying commentary to some of what they're doing. But with AA people, I think it's quite deliberate. I don't know if anybody remembers that show. There's an HBO show. It was called Deadwood. I mean, I fucking loved it. You know, it was brutal. It was full of profanity. It was just really obscene in a lot of places. But the whole thing was loaded with AA talk at times. I mean, I remember the sheriff at one part said, "What do they mean? I need to look at my part in it and all that." You know, let's just be honest here. How many sheriffs do you think there were in the 19th century and the 1800s that were going around asking about having a part in something, or talking about surrendering, or talking about acting your way into right thinking? I mean, you know, it was just so loaded with it in scenes that it actually just almost ruined the show for me. In fact, it was still a great freaking series, though. But I saw the creator, David Milch, one time being interviewed. And, you know, he was saying all this stuff about, you know, you cannot act your way into, you know, right thinking. I mean, you can't think your way into right acting. You have to act your way into right thinking. And if you want to make God laugh, you know, just make plans and tell God your plans and he will laugh at them. And there's a few more things he said. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, this guy ain't nothing but a big cult member. This guy ain't nothing but a big cult member using popular entertainment. He never made an actual reference to Quackaholics Anonymous in his interviews, but it was pretty obvious. You know, I'm a big Game of Thrones fan, but I could not stand it the last season when, you know, it's opening up and you got the High Septon guy who was played by Al Swearingen. Ironically enough, his real name is Ian McShane, but the same guy on Deadwood who played Al Swearingen. But he says, I don't know if the gods are real. I don't know if any god is real. Maybe nothing is real. But maybe I know that there is a power greater than ourselves. I mean, I just wanted to pick the fucking TV up and I just wanted to throw it through the fucking window. I was like, you know, this shit I don't want to hear, you know. But I've seen it in popular culture, oftentimes in Hollywood and oftentimes on the television. I mean, look at the TV series. I mean, you know how many TV series I've seen where the main character or somebody related to the main character who has a drinking problem has to go to AA. I mean, even a fucking serial killer like Dexter was going to AA to try to solve his serial killing problem. What was that freaking movie with Kevin Costner where he's like a cold-blooded serial killer, but he's going to try to stop serial killing because he's going to AA? I mean, it's just fucking ridiculous the way it worms its way in like that. And like I said, I don't think it's no grand conspiracy. I just think the fact of the matter is that the entertainment industry has always had a bit of a love or an affinity for Quackaholics Anonymous. In closing, I'll say this. Oh my God, that was a fucking cult. That was a slip. That sounded like something a cult member would say. What I was going to add at the end of this, before my screen blinked on me, that's the computer, you know. But in the 13th step to film, when I watched that, there was a scene where, you know, you're asking random people on the streets, you know, someone's got a drinking problem, someone's got a drug problem, where would you send them? And everybody said the same thing. Well, I'd probably tell them to, you know, go to AA meetings. I mean, that's how much it's wormed its way into our popular culture. That's how much that, you know, it has taken over everything. It's not really taken over everything. It's the way it's just seeped in to where it's almost become a reaction that everybody has. You hear alcohol problem. Well, after hearing all the Lifetime movies and after seeing all the series and after seeing all the fucking Dr. Phils and all that other shit, you think AA. How many people on the street do you think have ever heard of smart recovery or moderation management or harm reduction or the Sinclair method? How many people do you think on the streets have heard anything about rational recovery? I'm going to say very, very few. I didn't even know about it for at least 10 or 11 years that I was in AA. I had no idea there were other alternatives. I would occasionally hear some old timer talk about, there were these people that tried to do this method and it failed, they all got drunk. And that was about the extent of my knowledge. Granted, I don't think that Quackaholics Anonymous will be able to keep that kind of stranglehold over the treatment center, over the world or the country for much longer, because we are seeing a new generation of people that rely on social media, that rely on the internet, that rely on alternative media, that rely on, I was about to say alternative facts, but through the use of vlogging, blogging, things of that nature, where all the information is a fingertip away. And I don't think that it would, it would have the stranglehold that it once held, like in the golden age of the 1980s. I mean, today when I want to look up some information, I get on the computer. Back at the time that I first got into it, outside of the fact that everybody told me AA was the only way, even if you went to a library, the chances of finding something critical about it were nil almost. And even then, you had no one to communicate with. Like now with the social media outlets like Facebook and Twitter and stuff like that. I mean, people all across the country can talk on a daily basis about, the plague, the cancer in our society that's AA. I mean, there are people all over the country, all over the freaking world that I've been able to network with and talk to, and they all have the same experiences I do in AA. So the sense of isolation that cults thrive off of, I'm going to say with the new generation, it's largely broken. Now, do I think AA is going to magically go oof and disappear? Probably fucking not anytime soon. But I do believe that it's going to lose its grip. It's going to finally one day not be the only game in town. There's no shortage of people that want to join religious cults. History tells us that, even in this day and age. But I don't think it's going to be able to hold its power like it once had, its monopoly, for much longer. I guess that's about it. I didn't really actually plan on talking this long. I just got the camera going and I just started. So I guess I'll see you guys next week. How about that? Hopefully the microphone and the camera is a little bit better quality for listeners.